Well, good morning, everybody. I hope you're feeling well today. I hope that you have been blessed by being here. And I trust that as we come together and worship, that you always say what a blessing it is for us to be here. And I love when Wayne just comes up in his, I call it, inimitable way to just come up and to lead us in things. And Wayne said, let's talk about cherish. Do you cherish the fact you're able to be in the worship of the Lord today? I hope you do. It's where God wants us to be, and what a blessing it is. To those of you who are on live stream, let me welcome you with us, and as Kevin said at the beginning, we'd love to have you be with us sometime here in our services. Some are sick, unable to be here, and what a blessing it is for them to be able to participate with us, and we're thrilled to have you as a part of our service today. Those of you who are here, grateful that all of you are in our assembly today. We have some visitors today who are former members, and always thrilling to see your faces. Some family members, we're delighted to have you with us in our services today. Some of you are traveling. I met a family who lives in Indianapolis who've been to Tennessee for a wedding, and a stopping place was Evansville. I'm glad it was, and I hope you folks are blessed by being here with us today. Let me encourage you to be back tonight at 9 o'clock, or it's 9 o'clock, that'll be all right, 6 o'clock. I'd like for you to be here at 6 if you can tonight. Colin Dunn is speaking tonight. Colin and Caitlin just recently placed membership with us, and you know Colin's been sick, and he was going to speak last month, and because of sickness couldn't, and I want to encourage you tonight just to be here. Colin is an interesting young man I hope you get to know, and we look forward to our singing and our devotional tonight, and Paul's put all that together, and to all of you men who participate in that, we're thrilled to be a part of it. Well, I'd just like to take a big deep breath this morning and say, wow, what a week. Man. A lot of you have been clobbered this week by so many different things that have happened. I want to talk to you. I just want to talk to us today about where we are and the Lord and what we need in life. My lesson is entitled, When Flooded by Fears. Had any fears this week? I know a lot of you have. Life brings so many emotions. On the one hand, lots of joys. Man, on the other hand, some fears and discouragements and heartaches and trouble, and we say, how do we make it? You and I know sometimes life is like one week goes like this and we're way up here, and the next week we feel like we just crashed. And sometimes we feel like, man, this isn't fair. Life's not fair. I remind you, after some highs, lows can crash upon us, think about David's gigantic victory of Goliath in 1 Samuel chapter 17, followed by Saul's jealousy and a constant attempt to kill him the rest of his life. You think about Elijah's colossal victory at Mount Carmel, followed by Jezebel's threat, I'll kill you before this day is over, next day's over. Wow. And he was discouraged and terrified. 1 Kings chapter 26. You think about Israel with great anticipation. They're on the move to Canaan. We're going to the promised land. And that bubble of anticipation was burst when those 10 faithless spies came back and said, we can't do this. It's impossible. Those people are giants and we're like little grasshoppers in their sight. We can't do it. They're just too powerful for us. Many of you have recently, in fact, as I said this very week, have been flooded by fears. And I want to talk to you about that. I want to remind you there are circumstances that bring floods of fear on us, and some of those are bigger than us. Sometimes we may face fears because of some psychosis, and a person may need medication or therapy. Some events are caused by something that happened in childhood or later, and sometimes we need some therapy. We need to talk to some people to get through some of those negative impacts. I'm not talking about those kind of things today. I'm talking about just life and some everyday life situations that just bring terror to us. And how do we deal? How do we cope with it? What do we do to get through some of these tough things? And today I want to talk about how we can address these with God's help. First of all, I want to talk with you about when we face fears in life, some life situations that induce fears. Any of you in this room, I know some of you have, any of you in the past been in situations where you're facing a dangerous, even a deadly situation, maybe on the battlefield? You think about Israel, and they faced that daunting enemy Goliath. And in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 24, the Bible says, all the men of Israel, they saw this man, Goliath, and they fled from him and were dreadfully afraid. And David came to visit his brothers in the Israelite army, and they were terrified when old Goliath came out and challenged them, and David was just kind of overwhelmed in pain as he saw that. When God called Gideon to be a judge, the army of Israel was terrified of the Midianites. And as Michael read us a moment ago from that passage in Judges 7, God said, okay, you just tell all the people in the army that are afraid to go home. And out of 32,000, 22,000 left. How would you like to be one of that 10? Boy, where's our support? When facing a disheartening situation in life, terror can rear its head. When Israel came to the promised land, first city, Jericho, great victory. Oh my, God's given us the victory and we didn't even have to pull out a weapon. And then they go to that little tiny town called Ai. Should have been a piece of cake. And they were defeated. And the people of Israel were so discouraged about that. They were disheartened by the defeat. You remember the rest of the story as God says there's sin in the camp. It needs to be cleansed. Old Achan had disobeyed God and taken some of those things that they were told not to take at Jericho. It's interesting that the Bible says about what happened at Ai, the hearts of the people melted and became like water. Situations caused terror in their hearts. Well, you and I may not have been in a battle of war. We may not have been in a defeat like at Ai, but we do face things that nature brings sometimes that we have some concerns about. For example, what about natural disasters? The Lord, and Michael read us a passage about that back in Matthew chapter 8, and it's recorded in other accounts. Matthew 8, 23 to 26, the Lord's in the boat asleep. And all of a sudden, on that peaceful Sea of Galilee comes a squall that's like a tornado, and the waves are just vicious. And the Lord's disciples are terrified by the natural event. And the Lord's asleep. And the cry, "Teacher, don't you care? We're perishing. We can die in this event." You think about facing a tsunami or a hurricane, or perhaps more likely in our area, an earthquake or a tornado. People can be terrified. Secondly, this morning, people can be terrified by facing a person or a task that scares you. It may be as Moses is called by God. I want you to come and lead the people, my people, out of the land of Egypt and bondage and take them to the promised land. And you remember, old Moses, fear, terror reared its ugly head in statements like this: I'm a nobody. God, why are you asking me? Or, how am I going to convince Israel to listen to me and to let me lead them? Or, God, I can't talk well. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. It may be that you have terror when you're afraid of somebody's reaction to you, and sometimes you and I are put in situations that challenges our trust in God, and we know we ought to tell the truth, and sometimes we don't because we're afraid. Abraham did it twice. He didn't want to identify Sarah as his wife because he was afraid somebody would kill him, and so what did he do? He just lied about it. Genesis 12 and 20. Michael read us that passage in John 9 about the parents of that blind man. Here's a guy who's been blind all of his life. And the Lord heals him. Man, it's an amazing story. And you see this man rejoicing, but the Pharisees come, and who in the world is this that would heal somebody on the Sabbath day? Can't be from God. And you remember that blind man's response? Well, I don't know who he is. All I know what he's done. And I know I couldn't see, and now I can see. And this guy has to be from God. And so they go ask his parents. And the parents in John 9, because of being afraid of being kicked out of the synagogue, okay, you can't understand that today, let me explain it to you. I'm going to be disfellowshipped from the church. We just won't say anything. We can't give you an answer. Wouldn't stand up for their son, wouldn't stand up for the Lord because of terror. You think about Peter in denying the Lord 3 times. Alone, with the enemies of Jesus, not with the apostles. Put himself out there in a dangerous situation, and what happens? 3 times, the pressure gets to him, and he denies Jesus. Pilate in condemning Jesus. Pilate's wife said, honey, you better be careful. You sure about this? Pilate knew he was an innocent man, but because of the threat of the Jewish leaders, he gave in and said, you can take him and crucify him. And all, ladies and gentlemen, because you face a person or a task that scares you, and I don't want to deal with it. What about you and me? We're not put in a situation to condemn Jesus. What about when you and I are put in situations and somebody asks us about our faith and we tremble inside and refuse to stand up for what God says in the book because of fear? What if somebody asks us about salvation? What if somebody asks us about the church? What if somebody asks us about some moral fact? And rather than defending God's will, we in terror refuse to tell them the truth. Number 3. What about if you face fear for your children? Numerous ones of us in this room have been in situations where we faced fear for our children. It may be fear of a circumstance like this. He just got his driver's license this week. You think about David for Absalom. Absalom, who began to get the hearts of the people, turned away from David and turned to him. And he stole the hearts of the people. And then you see David having to flee barefooted east of the city, across the Kidron Valley and eastward, running for his life from his own son. And later, when David's captain Joab determined, I'll get Absalom, found him hung in the forks of a tree and took darts and killed him. And you hear David's agonizing cry, "Oh, Absalom, my son, Absalom." How many of us in this room today agonize because of children, grandchildren not being Christians, or having left the faith? Some of you have had struggles even this week Sally, our hearts have been with you. Some of you have had some terrifying events this week and things you've dealt with. Parents agonize for children who seem to have no heart for God, for children who become immersed in drug culture, for those who have emotional struggles, for those who may express disinterest in life or even attempt to take their life. I tell you, can terrorize us as parents. Number 4, we may face horrible fears when we face an event about which we feel uncertain. Subconsciously, you may say, I'm supposed to have surgery Tuesday morning at 8 o'clock. And people do it all the time. And they get put under by anesthesia, and it's no big deal until it's you Tuesday morning at 8 o'clock. This week, Thursday, Myrtle had cataract surgery. Really intense. Hadn't done that before. It may be some of you having heart catheterizations. Many of you have done it. And those kind of things, because we haven't done it, can be terrifying. It doesn't have to be a physical thing. It may be a new job. And you have great doubts about yourself. Can I do it? Am I going to be in a situation where people are going to be supportive of me? What are the pitfalls? I don't know what they are. I'm about to finish high school. What's going to happen when I step into college and I'm not going to be a senior anymore? I'm going to be the low guy on the totem pole, and how's that going to be? How am I going to be treated? It may be when illness or disease attacks you or a loved one. You may have had a terrifying medical event. Mary Lee this week ended up with some struggles because of vertigo. Anthony's here today. Wednesday morning, Anthony was trimming limbs out in his yard and started feeling bad and went in and took a shower. And after he got out of the shower, his words to me were, I was sweating worse than when I was in the shower. I was wetter than I was when I was in the shower. Hurting here, indigestion. To his credit, he called 911. Diane's at work giving tests and can't answer the phone, and didn't know till after 3:30 what had happened. He's in the hospital having had a heart attack and having a stent put in. Many of you are aware that Our Ladies' Day is coming up next Saturday, and Dorita Johnson was supposed to come and speak on Our Ladies' Day. Tuesday night, she was cleaning out the bathtub, down on her knees, and called to Roger and said, I need help, and her whole right side of her body is not working. Now, got her in the hospital, found out that she's had a TIA, not a stroke. Doctor says, you're not going to Evansville next week. So ladies, that means we can't have Ladies' Day. No, it doesn't. Rebecca King is going to present a lesson. Rebecca, appreciate you and proud of you for stepping up. But you know what, folks? Best laid plans of mice and men. Nellie Clem, Don, our hearts are with you, man. Nellie struggles with Alzheimer's and now Parkinson's. Breaks your heart as a mate. Lynn Stevens and her struggles with cancer and ongoing and trying to find out some other ways to treat her. It's tough. And this week, right now, for the first time, a lot of you are going to learn about somebody else. Evelyn, been praying for you this week. All of you need to be praying for Evelyn and Mac. Mac's been hurting for about 5 weeks. He stopped by Dr. David Johnson's office and just told David what was happening, and they did an x-ray, then an MRI. And Mac has cancer down in the very low part of his spine. And by the way, Mac's not been able to be here. He's not been able to get around. And Mac started chemo Tuesday. He needs your prayers. Evelyn, we'll all be praying for you. And just like Evelyn, all of you who are caregivers, man, it demands time and effort and heart and love and sacrifice. But you know what? When somebody you love gets sick, even in the midst of fear, you say, got to do something. Can I remind you just, we won't talk about them in detail, but think about some biblical stories of people when a loved one gets sick and what people go through. Jairus, his daughter's about to die. What's he do? I got to get Jesus or my daughter's going to die. And they're on the way to Jairus' house, and in the midst of that story, you know, all of a sudden there's an interruption. If I was Jairus, I'd like, would you get her out of here and let's get on with it? But that woman who'd had that issue of blood for 12 years, probably weak, struggling, wanting an answer, saying, I don't know where the answer is, but I'll tell you this, I need help. And she comes and touches the hem of Jesus' garment because I want to be healed. And they get to Jairus' house, and of course that daughter has died, but Jesus raised her. Think about in John 5, verses 1 to 9, that man, 38 years old, who had been told there's some water at the pool that will make the first person that gets in well, and he's been doing this for ages, and he can't get in the water. All he wants to be healed. You think about that Syrophoenician woman, a Gentile. Her daughter is possessed with a demon in Matthew chapter 15. And this woman would not allow rejection to keep her from begging for help for her daughter. I may be a Gentile, I may be to Jews a dog, but you know what? I don't care what people think about me. I just want help for my daughter. She would endure humiliation and even rejection. I need help. I'm terrified. You think about that father of the demon-possessed epileptic in Matthew chapter 17, and that demon would literally try to kill that boy by either throwing him in the fire and burning him or by drowning him. And this father begs for Jesus. I'm terrified for my child. We need help. Yep. There are times when it may be an illness or something about ourselves or our loved one that brings heartache to us. It may be when a loved one dies. You think about that widow of Nain. Her husband died, now her son's just died, and they're on the way to the cemetery. Can you imagine the brokenheartedness of that woman? Oh, by the way, I appreciated the prayer a few moments ago in talking about people that Rodney talked about people that may have died even years ago. And there's some of you in this room who've had death hit you just very, very recently. Joni's mom and Donna's brother. But there's some of you, it's been months since maybe a mate died, and there's some of you that it may have been a number of years since a loved one died, and the hurt hurts. And you feel awfully alone, especially at night. Now the question, what do we do? When you and I face fears of all of these kinds of things that I've just mentioned, I want to make some suggestions this morning for us. And brethren, I don't know what tomorrow brings. I don't know what this week brings in our lives. I know this, the last week has been tough for a whole bunch of you. Here's what I know every day, every hour of every week. Number one, when we face fears, brethren, we need to turn to the Lord. David said in Psalm 55, verse 22, cast your burden on the Lord, and He will sustain you. He will never permit the righteous to be moved. You cast your burdens on the Lord. Whatever fears are there. You ever felt like when all of these kind of things happen, you feel so helpless? What do? I don't know where to turn. Turn to the Lord. Remember what Paul said, I've been abased and I've abounded, but here's all I know. Whatever it is, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Whatever I face, I can make it if I turn to the Lord. That doesn't mean lean on yourself and your own strength only, brethren. Put trust at the Lord at the top of the priority list. Number two, you trust God. Moses had so many fears to lead Israel, and God's response was, I will certainly be with you, and this is the sign that I'll send you. And you remember, throw your rod down on the ground. Stick your hand in your bosom. I'll convince you miraculously you can trust me. Oh, He doesn't have to convince us miraculously. We know it, brethren. And you and I need to trust Him no matter how big the fear is. Why? He is able to deliver thee, the song says. Lean on God. Number three, we need to rely upon His providence. Man, there's a whole lot more people in this world than you and me. There's all kinds of people that God uses. Sometimes when circumstances seem almost impossible, we can't see the end of it. You rely upon God's providence. God will take care of you. And you and I need to pray to Him and say, God, take care of me even if I cannot see how this is going to end. I don't know what the end is. It terrifies me. God, take care of me. You never know when providentially someone may be the answer for your child's struggle or for a loved one's disease. You don't know. You don't know when an answer is found that God uses another person providentially to help get the answer, and the outcome's a good answer. Number four, brethren, when we face terrible fears in life, when you start out with the fear, make sure you got strong faith so the faith kicks in. Last Sunday, there was a lady here, and she came up to me and she said, Stephen, when I was in the hospital and I was facing cancer, you talked to me about fear and how fear can be so terrifying, but then what can happen when faith kicks in? And she said, that's so true. When you first get a diagnosis, when you first learn of a terrible bad event, fear rears its ugly head, and it can debilitate us. But there's a calmness when faith kicks in that's such a blessing. Number five, allow your brethren to strengthen and support you. How many times do we face something and it's like, I don't want to talk about it, I don't want anybody to know about it, I just want to deal with it, and when I get through it, then I'll talk about it. Really? Really? Brethren, I've watched some in our congregation do that through the years. That is not the way to handle stuff. I know some of us are very private, but listen. God designed the church to give you support and help when you face troubles. And the reality is, there's not one of us in this room big enough to face everything life throws at us by ourselves. We need to use those around us to give us strength. We need to let our brethren love and encourage and strengthen us. And the best thing of all, we need to have our brethren to pray for us. And I know this morning, I know it. I know y'all are going to be praying for Mac and Evelyn. They need our prayers. When Moses had so many excuses, God's answer was, just stop it. Here's your brother Aaron, he'll be your spokesman. Next of all today, never be ashamed to own your Lord. When you face situations that are fearful, the answer is, I'm not ashamed to own my Lord. I'm the Lord's. I am today, I'll always be. And when you tell people the truth and they become upset, listen, go back and read what God said to Samuel in 1 Samuel 8 and verse 7. They've not rejected you. They've rejected me, God said. You and I can tell people what God said. It's not our message, it's God's message. Don't be ashamed. We need, as the song says, to stand up for Jesus. We need to seek next of all a calmness that God brings. That jailer in Acts 16, he didn't understand. Look at Paul and Silas in the midst of an earthquake, and here I am, and other people are terrified, and these two guys are here, and they're singing and praying to God. How do you do that? It's because of our faith. It's because of Jesus. And you know what's interesting? That man who was about to kill himself, when he found Jesus and forgiveness, he had a peace and a joy just like Paul and Silas had. Yes, when you and I face terrifying situations with people, stand up for Jesus. And lastly this morning, we need to seek that calmness that God, one other one, we need to let hope be the anchor amidst the fears. That's what hope is. It's our anchor. No matter what the fears are, we've got an anchor that holds us steadfast. Now, I want to take you back to those different fears I mentioned at the beginning, and I want to give you some people who overcame, and I want you and I to think about it. Watch this. When you face fear of situations, be a David. My brothers are afraid of Goliath. Be a David. When you face a scary task, be an Abraham. God, you want me to take my son and put him on an altar and offer him? Hey, Dad, where are we going to find the sacrifice? Son, God will provide. When you face fears for your children, you be a David. You know what? If my child lives or dies, when that child died at 7 days of age, David's response was, I can't bring him back, but I can go and be with him. He prayed that 7 days before that child died fervently for his child. When life situations that cause fears in our lives, be with Paul. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. When you face an illness and you don't know, am I going to make it? You be like Paul said, for me to live. By the way, folks, this is why I be a Christian. This is why I be a faithful Christian. For me to live is Christ. To die, it's gain. Why? Because the Lord has a crown of righteousness laid up for me, Paul said in 2 Timothy chapter 4. And lastly, when a loved one dies, you imitate Martha and Mary. Hurt? Oh, to the core. Lord, if you'd been here, our brother wouldn't have died. But I know this, he'll be raised in the resurrection. I know there's life beyond death. Today, I encourage all of you. I know it's been a tough week for so many. And you're cared about, you're prayed for, you're loved. And brethren, let's love and help each other in the tough things that life throws at us. I extend the invitation today this way. I wonder if fear hinders you from obeying the Lord. Examples. What are my friends and family going to think? Examples. Can I do it? Would God ask you to do the impossible? examples. Maybe I'm not a member of the Lord's church, and what are my former religious leaders going to think? Are you going to give in like the blind man's parents did and not acknowledge Jesus because you're afraid of some men? I wonder today, any of you who are not Christians, I heard about a lady this past week who's not a Christian because she's afraid of the water. For some of you, that could be very real. Listen, I promise you, if that's a fear, we will help you obey the Lord and get through it, to work through that fear, because you got to do what the Lord said. He that believes and is baptized shall be saved. We will help you. Because to have forgiveness is too big to be overcome by fear. I encourage you today to let faith, if you're not a Christian, to let faith know who Jesus is, look what He's done, look at His love, and to let faith lead you to be determined to be obedient. Don't let any fear, whatever it is, don't let any fear keep you from obeying the Lord. Don't let any fear keep you from being saved. Don't let any fear keep you from going to heaven. Because faith is too precious, faith is too powerful, heaven is too beautiful, and eternity, ladies and gentlemen, is too long for any of us to let a fear cause us to be lost. We extend the Lord's invitation with love to you. If you need to respond today, would you come while we stand and sing?